这一个7:30，星期五的早晨，286-936的观众、听众朋友们，大家 Good morning， 欢迎收看、收听我爱纽西兰，我是 Andrew 安德鲁。小焦呢在另外一旁，因为现在呢在我身边坐的是奥克兰市长 Phil Goff。Good morning, Phil.
Good morning, 你好。
Good to see you.
Yeah, good to be back.
Yeah. What are you planning to share with us this morning? But by the way, yeah, are you wrapping up?
I'm finishing up on the 8th of October. I'm not standing for re-election. After 40 years of running for elections, every election cycle, it's going to be quite unusual for me. But it's a long time in public service. I did over 32 years in Parliament and then 2 terms as Auckland Mayor. And I figure it's time for a new generation to pick the baton up. So looking forward to doing something different in the future. But not quite doing the 12-hour days that I'm working at the moment.
Now, talking about the 2 terms that you've been serving us, I always wanted to ask you this, because we often hear people, including myself, honestly, blame you and the councils for asking more money. Keep on asking more money, Even my wife, actually, she ordered me to ask you this question. So, just ask Phil Goff. Just ask Phil Goff, how come he always asking for more money, So we don't understand, all right? But partly because we don't understand how the city council runs.
Yeah.
Okay, now, say for example, there are a few very important entities like Auckland Transport, Water Care, and perhaps Port of Auckland. They are actually owned by the City Council. Am I correct?
That's correct. Although ports are different because they're a commercial company.
Okay.
So they're at much more arm's length than the others.
However,
yes,
it doesn't seem like you as a mayor, you have too much authority to interfere with the way how they run the business.
Yeah, well, that's true. The government, way back in 2010, deliberately set up Auckland Council so that the council was at arm's length from what's called council-controlled organisations, like Watercare, like Auckland Transport. Ports of Auckland is different because the shares were bought in the Ports of Auckland by Auckland Council, but under the Ports Companies Act, they have to act, and properly so, as a commercial organisation. But the government did something different in 2010 again. They put in place an organisation called Auckland Council Investments Limited, which was the shareholder for the ports rather than the council. So it kept the council even further away. Now, I abolished that because that was a blockage in the way of our exercising the oversight that we should have as shareholders on behalf of Auckland residents over the Ports of Auckland. And I was really unhappy with how the Ports of Auckland was being run.
Well, as a result, as a result, we see the former CEO Tony Gibson's. He's been rewarded $1 million.
Yeah, a disgrace
for lousy performance.
Yeah, a disgrace in my view.
And honestly, I understand that you were not happy about it. But
I was most unhappy about it.
Well, honestly, but there's very little you can do about it.
Yeah. Well, look, there's a court case I can't talk about because it's before the court. But there were 2 things at the Ports of Auckland. One was the health and safety record was terrible. When I went back and looked at, there are 2 organisations set up to investigate fatalities and serious injuries. One is called Maritime New Zealand, the other called WorkSafe New Zealand.
Sure.
I went and read the reports about the fatalities that happened on the wharf, and I was appalled. What those reports said was that there was a bad culture on the ports. Rules were put in place but never enforced. So the guys driving these big straddle carriers were using their phones, their mobile phones, while they were driving. They were setting off a tip alarm regularly, 60 or 70 times a shift. They weren't wearing their seatbelts, and the port did nothing to enforce that. So I ordered an independent inquiry and got the ports to pay for it, and that found exactly what I was worried about. So we're in the process of fixing that. But then the port decided they were going to go into automation. Now, that's a commercial decision by them.
There's $65 million
$65 million in software lost. Now, I can tell you, I'm not an IT expert, but I've been in politics long enough to know that IT projects are high risk. And before you embark on
you need to do a lot of investigation.
You need to do your homework.
Yeah.
And I've asked for another review, yet another review, to say, what homework did they do before they embarked on this project? It may be that it was simply unfortunate they got it wrong. It may be that they didn't do the homework that they needed to, and that the checks and balances weren't in place. But we now have a new port chief executive who's, I think, is very good. We've got a new, an almost entirely new port board, and we want to set that port off in a better direction.
So, here comes to my first questions, because we often hear about, like project budget blowouts, inefficiencies, a bit of wastage of resources and so on. Yeah, you might disagree with that, but, these are all reported, comes from the news. Now, so my question is, do you really believe the structure of the Auckland City Council is actually working fine for Auckland, or maybe the future of Auckland, honestly?
Yeah. We had yesterday a committee meeting called Value for Money. Yeah. What it showed is that in the last 9 months we've found the $90 million in savings that we were looking for. It said that over this term of council we've found over $400 million in savings. And since the council was set up...
And where are all this money? Because money is gone.
Well, the money... let me give you a perfect example. And I had to fight some councillors over this. When we amalgamated, we didn't need 12 different... Well, we had 12 different council buildings around the city. I said, look, that's far more floor space than we need. It's costing us money. We need to dispose of those. We have... We're now down to half the floor space we had. We've saved 50% on energy costs, and we've saved on $180 million that we would have had to have spent in renewal and maintenance of those premises that we are disposing of. Now, there was a group of councillors that said, no, we should keep all these buildings, they're important. I said, we're not using them, they're empty, they're costing us money, why would we keep them? Now,
so the result was?
The result was that there's $180 million in the next 10 years that I've saved you as a ratepayer. Let's give another example. We used to do a lot of our data in-house and our data storage and processing. We now use a cloud system, which is, good technology. That saved us $17 million in the last 2 years. So we're out there, and I've instructed officials every day, they're going to be out there. How can we do things more efficiently? How can we deal with duplication? How can we cut our costs without cutting our services? And, the reports are there. They're publicly available. The meeting yesterday was in public. The officials will show you the data. We have made those savings. Now, have we finished the job? No, of course not. That job never finishes.
So structure-wise, is there anything that needs to be changed or improved?
Yeah. Look, I think I'm having.
Do you think the future mayor should be given more authority or more power to decide something?
Depends who it is.
What about you? I mean, after 5.5 years,
look, people say, "Oh, you're mayor.
Exactly.
You're really important."
But you only have one vote.
I'm one vote out of 21. So what I've got to do on every vote is I've got to work with my councillors to find a majority to get the reforms through. And generally, over 6 years, I've got every budget through.
That's including the what do you call it? The climate action
targeted rate.
Rate.
Yeah, this is about.
You want to talk something about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, last year in New Zealand, we had the hottest year in 110 years. That's as far back as our meteorological records go. We've just had a report from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change to say if we don't act in the next 10 years, we've got an appalling future. We will have a climate catastrophe. And 190 governments have signed up to that. 190 governments around the world. We've just had the report to say that in the next 10 to 20 years, our sea level in Auckland will rise by 30 centimetres. We know that this is the third year that we've had drought. Not this month, we've had plenty of rain this month, but we've had 3 summers of unprecedented drought. So you say, and go back to your wife's question, because I really feel I have to answer your wife's question.
If your wife is happy, you are happy. That's always the case.
Happy wife, happy man, they say. Or happy man, happy wife. It works both ways. But, we put last year $250 million into ensuring that we had a decent water supply for Auckland. We cannot afford as a city to run out of water. So we now I've added 100 million litres a day extra water supply. We are now working more on repairing our old infrastructure. So you watch on television and you see every week a water pipe burst in Wellington, and it's a shambles. we are doing that. We've got our leakage down. I think it's about 12%, which sounds still really high, but by world standards, that's very good.
I have no problem with all these infrastructures,
well, that's what we've been spending
for
your money on. And
but what I'm saying is, with regards to climate change, don't get me wrong, Phil. I'm not trying to be negative about it. I understand the importance of climate change. However, I just don't understand, number one, with the amount of money that we have invested and the amount of focus that we place in, what is that going to change or stop the rising sea levels? And number two, how is that going to change the world's carbon emissions?
Yeah, right. Right. Let's take the two questions. Firstly, look, there's no point in us saying we're not going to do anything unless everybody else does everything, because if everybody's doing that, nothing happens and we drift into catastrophe. And, I'm not exaggerating. This is what the scientists tell us. This is going to hurt us and hurt us badly. Secondly, so we've got to play our part. So does the rest of New Zealand. So does the rest of the world.
I understand all that, and I do accept it, all that. But the thing is, at the moment, is climate change the most crucial and important issues that the Aucklanders are facing? This is what I'm trying to get at. You see, like climate change is not going to put more food on the table for struggling families. Come on.
No, but look at this. If you do nothing about climate change, that will affect agriculture. We've got creeping desertification. More and more of the world is becoming a desert. The acidification of our oceans is growing up. The temperatures of our oceans are going up.
So what are you going to do
you asked the question, is this the most serious problem? For us right now, it is, because if we don't act, our kids and our grandkids will inherit an impossible world. Now, it's all very well for you and me to say, it's not going to happen this year, so let's not worry about it, we'll do something else. We've got to think for the future. We've got to plan ahead. The worst thing that human beings do is not plan for the future. And when we don't plan for the future, we end up with disaster. And if we haven't acted now, the problem that we have to deal with in 10 years, 20 years will be that much harder to fix, that much more expensive, and that much harder to reverse. This is a serious problem.
Yes, it is a serious problem. But when you ask those struggling families, climate change or food on the table, which one is more important? Well, they will give you a completely different answer. How you, as a mayor, how are you going to turn Auckland more affordable? How are you going to help the struggle businesses and struggle families?
Well, I wished I could deal with international oil prices and the war in Ukraine.
Don't blame that. Come on. Regional fuel prices, regional fuel tax. We're not going to see any.
Look, we know that the old way of dealing with transport problems in Auckland, where you just keep building more suburbs further and further out, and you widened your motorway more and more, didn't work. They didn't work in New Zealand. They didn't work in any country in the world. We know. Look at every big city in the world. You've got to have a really good public transport system.
Yes.
Now, ironically, when I was a kid, there were more people travelling on public transport in this city than there are now, when our city was only 500,000. Because what everybody went by tram. And then we decided, look, motor cars are fantastic, and they are, really convenient way of getting around, but you end up with congestion and you end up with transport emissions. Now, we have got to change the way that we think. And that means that, look, if I go and live in another big city and I want to get around it, how do I travel? Do I hop in a car and drive around? No, you've been around the world many times. You know that you use public transport, and we need to have more people on short trips walking or cycling than they are
so
at the moment.
So how are we be able to encourage people to take up more public transports? By if the public transport system is not up to scratch and it's very expensive.
Okay, yeah. Well, it's half price at the moment, so make the most of it.
Are you going to push the central government to make it permanent?
I'd love that to be permanent. Of course I would.
But what have you done to put pressure on the central government?
What you're weighing up is, how do you get more people on public transport? Is it simply by lowering the fares? But if you lower the fares, you reduce the income. You reduce the income, and you can't make better services.
What do you mean by reduce the income?
Well, because we get a lot of our income out of our passenger fares. So if we we subsidise public transport by about 50%. We also subsidise roads, of course.
But that doesn't actually stack up, Phil. How can you actually encourage people to take up more public transport and maintain the fare as it is?
Let me give you this example. I might have given it to you before. when I was in cabinet last, one of our decisions was to create a northern busway, a separate place where the buses weren't caught in the everyday traffic. And people said, North Shore people, they're wealthy people. They'll never travel by bus. Guess what? 53% of the people coming into the city in peak hour come in by bus now.
Because they got no choice.
Because it's a lot more convenient, it's quicker, it's more reliable.
They can find
and
a
it's
parking in the
comfortable.
city.
That's right. And unless you want me to turn the whole of the city into a parking lot, they won't. Of course they won't. So we have to do things differently.
So you are trying to do something to force people to take up public transport, but not encouraging
I'm trying to
them.
give them the choice so that they've got a good public transport system so that they can say, I mean, unfortunately, where I live, I don't have public transport, so I don't have that option. I drive an electric car. I don't create emissions, but I do add to the congestion. But if I was living close to a bus or a rail route, and I was working in town, would I be travelling by public transport? Of course I would be. Now we've got problems with public transport at the moment because COVID, etc., and shortage of drivers. But the future will not be about everybody being able to drive wherever they want.
Are you a supporter of the light rail?
Yes, of course I am. Because if you don't have light rail, then all of the people on the isthmus, where we are trying to intensify our population so that we're not spreading out further and further into the countryside, but we've got higher density housing. That higher density housing will be based around rail routes, bus routes, and light rail routes. So probably about a quarter of the population growth in the future will be along that light rail route from the city centre to Mount Roskill and then through to Mangere.
Phil, how do you classify it, or how do you actually define a world-class city?
A world-class city is a city where you want to come and live in because it gives you a good quality of life. It's vibrant, it's exciting, the environment is sustainable, there's work there, there's exciting leisure activities to follow, the water supply is reliable, the sewage is treated well.
So do you actually
the air is
call
clean.
Auckland a world-class city? Honestly.
Yeah,
according to your definition just now. It is not affordable, the public transport is not accessible. All right, and it is not safe. How can you classify Auckland as a
I'll just ask you one
city?
question, Andrew. Why did you come and live here?
I tell you what, it's a matter of choice.
Yeah.
If I have a choice, I'll move somewhere else.
Would you? Well,
maybe.
Well,
maybe I'll go to UK. I don't know.
Well, the inflation there is running at about 8.5%. So good luck with that.
Okay.
But no, look. I mean, why? This is the city.
You see more people actually moving out of Auckland. That's the fact.
Yeah. But you're also seeing, and we've seen for the last 20 years, people coming from all around the world to live in Auckland. Auckland is being classified as one of the world's most livable cities. That's on international surveys. And is it perfect? Of course it's not perfect. It's a work in progress. Hey, but look, I spent a lot of time in Beijing when I was negotiating free trade agreements. And, would I go out and breathe the air there and say this is world class? No, I wouldn't. I can go out and breathe the air in Auckland and say that's good. The harbours we're in the process of cleaning up, where wastewater used to spill into the harbours, when we've finished our central interceptor, that will be gone. When we've got our city rail link connected, we've doubled the capacity of heavy rail. When we've got light rail going through, that will make it really easy to get around our city. The Eastern Busway, the part that we've completed already makes that bus service much better.
It sounds like we have a long way to go, but we are
we always have a long way to go. But are we making progress? And the answer is yes.
Yeah, that's the problem. Why are you leaving us? You see, that comes back to the original questions.
I'm getting older, Andrew.
Okay. Anyway, it's really good to talk to you, Phil, this morning.
As always, Andrew, I really enjoy it, and to all of the listeners, it's winter time. It's a bit tough at the moment. Too much COVID and too much flu around, but look after yourselves, go well, and in a week's time it'll be the shortest day and we're on the way back to summer.
There you go. You have a good weekend.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll see you next time.
Cheers.
Thank you. 跟我们的市长有约，一个非常愉悦。
我觉得今天还挺愉悦的
啊！
今天他还挺愉悦的感觉
啊，他也放松了啦啊，他的那一份什么气候这个行动budget 就是说过关了嘛啊，那么就是说每一年呢市政府呢将会要投入呢5700多万。在这一个应对气候变化方面，那么其中呢就是说主要是就是把一些我们这个什么公交车啊转型啊，建造更多的这些什么自行车道啊、行人道等等啊，这些都是 不是什么新鲜话了啊，新鲜事情了。然后呢，又同时也希望呢，中央政府呢也能够提供那么使到呢，每一年呢，在应对这个气候变化方面，奥克兰市的这个投入呢是可以达到差不多1个亿。
对，是其实我刚才听下来啊，我感觉其实他比以前说话的时候也更放胆了，就更敢说了。就以前可能很多话他还是小心着说，但是现在好像有一点敢说真话的感觉。
他已经是开始在收拾包袱了，你知道吗？就是说呢，
说一些心里话。
他到这个10月初啊，他的这个任期就到期了。然后呢，他说呢，虽然官方呢还没有正式的公布啊，他也没有正式的承认，但是他也没有否认啊，没有否认呢，他将要去这个英国啊，出任这一个纽山驻英国的这个大使啊。
毕竟还是有一段时间了，还有到10月份的，所以呢，这不会是他最后一次来到节目当中，只不过就是可能越临近，我觉得他会更说出一些心里话。
是
这次能够很明显的感觉到，他有一些对于这个城市或者他的一些执政的理念，他是蛮直截了当的在说的，我觉得也挺有趣的。
首先，当然我问到他，就是说有关这一个奥克兰市政府的现有的这个架构方面呢，这种架构呢，是不是真的是为这个奥克兰这一个城市呢能够带来好处？还是要去做出一些什么样的改变？那么呢，一开始呢，就是说到呢，在他过去的这几年呢，就是说在他不断的这个努力的推动之下呢，就是说奥克兰市议会呢，在这个开支方面呢，是节省的钱是越来越多了。
他就说他刚接任的时候，那个时候就发现奥克兰的市议会在整个奥克兰有12个不同的就是 council 工作的这些办公室。他说呢，那个 floor 的面积啊，就整个的用的面积根本就用不了那么多，所以在他5年的这个努力之下，首先他们把这个 Auckland Council 拥有的这样办公室的面积呢是缩小了1半，所以呢也是省下了不少钱。这个也算是他功绩之一吧，因为问到他省没省钱嘛。
原本呢，在新冠疫情之前呢，他担任奥克兰市长呢，那时候呢，他就在他的推动之下呢，就节省了差不多9000万的开支。他是那么说的。那么后来呢，到现在为止呢，他认为呢，他的这个总共的这个节省的开支呢，是差不多多达4个亿了，你知道吗？
这段我没听着，
就是说各方面这个就包括你刚才所说的那些 office space 的这个减少等等各方面的开支的这个减少。那当然到底是还是不是的这一条账，到底该怎么算的不得而知
但是说到就是整个这个奥克兰市议会的框架，我们知道奥克兰的市议会旗下是有一些这个 government control 的这些 agent 的，比如说什么 Auckland Transport Water Care 等等。但是还有一个不同的就是 Port of Auckland， 最近 Port of Auckland 不是总出事嘛，所以刚才 Andrew 也问到他这件事情。他就首先呢，先甩了个小锅，他就说本来呢，奥克兰市议会对于 Port of Auckland 的控制是比现在多的，但是后来呢，就是改了一种方法，变成呢，
就是来自于中央政府的，
对，是中央政府的一个改变，一个法律的上面的一个修改，所以就变成他们只是类似于像 investment， 就有点像投资的那种股东的身份，他
就是一个 shareholder， 一个股东，
所以他就没有很多事情，等于说市议会看着那边干着急，但是他也做不了什么，这是他的感觉。所以他说他在看整个 Port of Auckland 的问题的时候，他也非常的火大，尤其是他就提到说什么安全啊，他说这个当时他们的一些其实那个规矩在 Port of Auckland 都是有的，但没有人去。
尤其是之前的那位首席行政他并没有按照这个规矩呢，就是严谨的保障员工们的这个安全。
对，他说他就看到，比如说什么开着那个大的铲车的，什么一边玩手机不系安全带，他说这种东西感觉好像也没人管。另外就说到呢，6500万的就我们说的软件系统，现在不是付诸东流了嘛？他说虽然他也不是 IT 方面的专家，但是他说他以他的从政的经验也是知道，就说这个 IT 的投资本来就是风险很大的。那么在投之前，他认为 Port of Auckland 也没有做好评估，所以现在呢就导致这6500万就没有了，
是
浪费了。
那么另外呢，当然那其实当中里面也当然说了很多了，其中包括了这一份报告出来的一些调查的这一个结果。
对。
那么当然我还有问到他有关这个公交系统方面他们因为这一个 Phil Goff 呢一直是强调呢，有越来越多人是使用这个公交系统，那我就认为呢，就是说这是不是因为他们已经是没有选择了被迫不是他们自愿的也不是因为这个市政府的鼓励，而是他们因为没有选择的情况之下呢，被迫使用这个公交系统。还有现在呢，中央政府的这个半价的这一公交系统方面的这个推动，那么奥克兰市政府包括了他自己 as mayor 市长是不是会给予政府一点点的压力？希望呢这个半价呢将会是一个永久性的呢？那么他基本上他没有给予这个非常正面的回答了那么当然可能呢，他认为
他希望
可能跟他也没有什么太长的一些 关系的。
是，他也说了，就是我们也知道整个的交通，就尤其是公共交通这方面，收入就是大家付的这个车费呀，还有船费啊等等，其实是整个公共交通系统它建设的一个非常主要的资金来源。那等于说，如果我们变成了半价的话，其实它的收入也在减少。所以他的意思就是说呢，如果我没这个收入，我也不能提供更好的公共交通。
那么另外呢，他也表示说呢，他也支持呢在奥克兰的建造这一个轻轨。